Hi guys, welcome back to this session of macros in LibreOffice Calc. Macros in LibreOffice Calc, and above all in most of the software, is a powerful tool that automate repetitive tasks by recording a sequence of actions. Also, one can create a macro with arguments in Visual Basic that can be used doing day-to-day tasks. A macro is a set of instructions or code written in VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, the programming language used by LibreOffice Calc. It allows you to perform repetitive tasks with a single command. For example, formatting a spreadsheet, applying filters, or performing calculations. Steps to create and run a macro with arguments in LibreOffice Calc. 1. Create a macro with arguments. 1. Open LibreOffice Calc. 2. Go to Tools, Macros, Organize Macros, LibreOffice Basic. 3. In the LibreOffice Basic Macros window, select the document where you want to save the macro, then click New to create a new module. 4. Give the module a name, and then click OK. A code editor will open. 5. Write the macro code. Let's continue with the steps to create and run a macro with arguments in LibreOffice Calc. 2. Run the macro with arguments. 1. In the LibreOffice Calc spreadsheet, press Alt plus F11 to open the macro editor again. 2. Go to Tools, Macros, Run Macro. 3. In the Run Macro window, select the macro you just created in the module where you saved it. Call the macro with arguments by adding a new macro that calls the existing one with specific arguments. How to create and run macros in Calc. A macro in Visual Basic is either defined as procedure or a function. A function returns a single value that is the result of processing. A procedure is defined with the sub and end sub keywords in Visual Basic. Input to a function is provided through arguments. Just a built-in function. This sample code is a procedure that takes two arguments. One range of the cells and second color code with which the specified range is to be formatted. The code in the procedure body actually uses the two arguments to apply the color code argument to the range of cells passed as an argument. Now the question is how to run the macro with arguments. To test and use the macro with the arguments, define another macro without arguments, and in that procedure call the created macro with arguments. The sample code defining macro with arguments and a macro to call this macro is shown on the screen. To learn developing macro, one needs to learn Visual Basic. Let's, after understanding theory, actually use LibreOffice Calc to learn using macro in Calc. The lab session is to learn creating and running macros with or without arguments. Arguments are inputs provided to a macro. A macro with arguments can be used to perform different functionalities by passing different arguments. It makes macro with arguments more versatile. To use macro in LibreOffice Calc, use submenu option macros in the Tools menu option. The different languages in which macro can be defined. It could be Visual Basic, JavaScript, or even Python. The language selected is Visual Basic. Now select Edit Macro option to write the code for macro. This is code where macros are defined as a procedure with sub and end sub keywords. Don't touch the main procedure. Write your code below it. Let's define a macro with name, test, without arguments with sub and end sub keywords. Here, we simply use the built-in function message box to display a message. The message to be displayed is enclosed in double quotes. Now it's time to test the created macro. Select Run Macro option. It displays the dialog box. The two macros main and test can be seen in the module. Select Test, and then click on the Run button. The message box function of Visual Basic displays the message, Hello from macro, in a tiny window. Select Edit Macro option to open the code window. Now let's create a macro with arguments as a procedure in Visual Basic. The function of this macro will be to compute the identity a plus b whole square. Let's define a procedure with sub and end sub keywords. The name of procedure is identity, and it accepts two argument of integer data type. The name of argument is a NB. A variable in computer world is a location in main memory of computer where it stores accepted input data from user. It also stores results of processing. Visual Basic requires a variable to be declared before use. It is declared with the dim keywords as can be seen. Now let's write the code to compute a plus b whole square by using the identity. A square plus 2 multiplied by a, and b plus b square. To display the result of computation, let's again use the message box function. Here, ampersand is used to contact text message with computed result. Remember how arguments are created. Note a single before any statement in Visual Basic makes it a comment, which is not executable. The compiler or an interpreter just ignores it. It is often used for documentation purpose. The question is how to test the identity macro created as a procedure with arguments. It is different from that of Excel. In LibreOffice Calc, one needs to create another without arguments and call the identity macro with actual values as argument to it. Here we create macro named test argument to test the identity macro with arguments. To call a procedure that is a macro, use its name and in brackets, pass the two values as an argument. Also, let's create two variables with values 10 and 20 to pass them as arguments to the identity function. Two calls to the created macro identity. Remember, a procedure or a function defined once can be called as many times as required. This is also code reusability. Passing different values as arguments makes macro versatile. Now let's return to Calc to use the created macro. Now, select Run Macro option from Macros in the Tools menu option. Now select Test Identity from the displayed window and then click on Run button. Since we called identity twice with different arguments, hence two results in two message box windows. Let's once more check the code window and the definitions of the macros. Please check my video on macros in Excel to understand the difference. The difference lies in using a macro with arguments. A macro with parameters allows you to pass information, arguments, to the macro when it is called. These parameters can be used to control what the macro does without editing the macro itself every time. Benefits of using parameters in macros. Flexibility. Macros with parameters allow for greater flexibility since the behavior of the macro can be controlled dynamically. Reusability. Instead of creating multiple macros for different tasks, a single macro with parameters can be reused for various scenarios. Efficiency. Parameters reduce the need to edit the code frequently, thus saving time and preventing errors. Thank you guys for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks in advance. Please do share the video. Finally, thanks once again for watching the video.